It is difficult to imagine New York City as anything other than the mecca of cultural, racial, and ethnic diversity. Indeed, the welcoming of all comers has always been concrete testament to New York's special place in the history of civilization. The last great shining beacon, a beacon guiding men and women to that great landing place of freedom. But the golden door didn't always swing open to those yearning to breathe free. New York, as was the case with many cities and towns throughout the United States, did not always live up to the great American ideal of liberty and justice for all. For the massive number of Irish Catholic immigrants fleeing the ravages of famine in their native Ireland during the decade of the 1840s, New York was far from a welcoming place. The new Irish immigrants were destitute and Catholic, a religion viewed by American Protestant nativists of the era as anti-progressive and anti-Republican. The Irish were viewed as an advanced legion of the Roman Pope, and nativists were convinced that continued massive waves of these contemptible souls would spell unprecedented trouble for the social and religious institutions of the country. When John J. Hughes became the fourth diocesan bishop of New York in 1842, Roman Catholicism was still a minority and very much persecuted religion. Assailing Catholicism often took on forms more brutal than words or writing. It was the age of the torch, and many a nativist mob marched out under the cover of darkness in places like New York for the purpose of burning churches to the ground. This was part of the official welcoming to be accorded the early Irish immigrants, and this experience, no doubt, was etched into the memory of many sons and daughters of Erin. Up to this point in time, the American Catholic hierarchy's approach to continued onslaught against its people had been one of passivity, advising the faithful to live quiet and more virtuous lives. This was not to be the course followed by John Hughes. A native of Analogan, County Tyrone, Hughes' arrival on the ecclesiastic scene in New York was to mark a radical departure not only for the embryonic church in New York, but for the Catholic Church in the United States. Hughes was to become the incarnate nightmare of Protestant nativists, and by the end of his episcopal reign in 1864, could lay claim to a robust and aggressively growing Catholic Church, a church that by the end of the 19th century would be the largest and most powerful religious institution in the country. Hughes was to take his famine-battered and materially challenged countrymen and begin the process of reassimilating them into their Catholic faith, a faith destroyed in Ireland through the pernicious penal laws of the previous 150 years. Hughes was to accomplish this through the aggressive establishment of parish churches and even banking institutions to encourage savings and thrift. But perhaps as great as the establishment of the means of reacquainting Irish Catholics with the faith of their fathers was the means needed to establish the structure for providing education to the thousands of Irish and other Catholic children in need of schooling. The Protestant-dominated education system of New York City of the 1840s was geared toward the revilement of Catholic doctrine and belief. Catholic students who attended the common schools at this time were daily subjected to slurs against the Pope, priests, and Catholic doctrine. Hughes sought the financial means necessary to establish separate Catholic schools by demanding that a portion of the tax monies utilized in supporting common schools be allowed for use in the establishment of Catholic schools. In this position, Hughes was supported by Governor of New York, William H. Seward, who unequivocally believed that children of immigrant parents, so numerous in many of the nation's most populous centers of the time, were entitled to go to schools where they could receive instruction not only in their native language, but in their religious beliefs as well. Though funding for separate Catholic schools was never to materialize, the tenacity of Hughes was a major contributing factor in the eventual abolition of the Protestant-dominated public school society, the regulatory body that governed the New York common schools, replacing it with a new Board of Education, which would not permit the allocation of funds for schools of a religious nature of any kind. Hughes proceeded to establish a separate Catholic school system. Schools providing a faith-based environment where the gospel message of compassion and service to others provided the underpinnings for a sound grounding in the 3 R's. The New York Catholic school system would grow and flourish through the decades, providing educational opportunity not only for Irish children, but for successive waves of German, Italian, Polish, African American, Hispanic, and Chinese immigrant children as well. Hughes was to demonstrate the same commitment to higher education in the diocese by moving the diocesan seminary from Lafargeville to the Rose Hill Estate in Fordham, which would become St. John's College, later to become that esteemed center of higher learning, Fordham University. What of John Hughes the man? What of this fierce proponent of the Irish poor of New York? Many would say that John Hughes was not a very likable character. He would not loom large in the sphere of likable persons. He would be accused by his detractors of many things: being an autocrat, running his diocese like an Irish chieftain, brooking no dissent, in effect not having much regard for other members of his diocese, which included French, African American, and Hispanic Catholics as well. Hughes was, first and foremost, a bishop for the Irish and established outreach as a church for the Irish. And in that sense, to accomplish what he did in New York with his Irish community, he had to stand toe-to-toe with the ugliest of nativist bigots. He had to be a man who was willing to face down those who would face down his church and his people, and in time grudgingly won respect even from them, in making them understand that his Catholic Church and his Irish people were here to stay. Hughes demonstrated tremendous leadership in an extraordinary interview with the Democratic mayor of New York, Robert Hunter Morris. In the face of anti-Catholic violence and continued attacks against churches and Roman Catholics, the mayor of the city of New York asked Hughes if he was able to provide protection for his people and for their churches. Hughes said we were, but he had come to the mayor for the purpose of warning him against the possibility of reprisals against his people and churches. It was at that moment that the Democratic mayor of New York realized that the key to continued security and safety and nonviolence in New York rested firmly in the hands of a Roman Catholic prelate, who, under no circumstances, was to back down. As the result of Hughes' strong leadership, there was no violence, no church burnings, and peace was maintained. No organization is more closely associated with this historic campus than the Ancient Order of Hibernians. Organized in Ireland in the 1500s for the purpose of protecting the mass, the priest, and the Catholic Church, the Ancient Order of Hibernians came to the United States, incorporated in New York City in 1836. As the number of Irish immigrants exploded in huge numbers, Catholicism and Irish immigration came to be associated with one and the same thing, a force that Native Americans saw as a force that had to be stopped. On more than one occasion, members of the Ancient Order of Hibernians would be called upon to defend this very campus. Mounting the parapets in these walls, members of the Ancient Order of Hibernians armed with muskets stood ready to die in defense of the essence of their Roman Catholic faith. One of the great legacies of those dark early years of the Catholic diaspora would come into sharp focus from the steps of the Capitol in January of 1961, when John Fitzgerald Kennedy, himself the descendant of Irish famine immigrants, was inaugurated the 35th President of the United States. The scattered debris of the Irish nation had finally come of age. Hughes, while ministering to the spiritual and material needs of his people, still preached a gospel of assimilation, education, and most importantly, loyalty to America. His greatest contribution was his ability to hold together a nascent Catholic Church under attack. The Catholic Irish were America's first urban poor. They were grossly persecuted, discriminated against, and shunned because of their religious and ethnic origin. As the United States stands today on the threshold of major immigration reform, Irish Catholics have a special mission to those who represent the new American immigrants of today. Irish Catholics must look back into their collective past and remember a time when an immigrant from County Tyrone stood face to face against the forces of xenophobia and hatred. Irish Catholics must reach far back in their collective memory and realize that they have vast experience as frontline soldiers in the war against bigotry, that they, more than any other group, have the experience of perpetuating that great beacon light of freedom for others. No matter how the passage of time may view John Hughes, The essence and spirit of his life and work can be summed up in the eulogy given by Archbishop, later Cardinal John McCluskey, Hughes' successor and first American member of the College of Cardinals. He was, said McCluskey of Hughes, a stranger to fear. His heart was filled with undaunted courage. In the presence of dangers and difficulties, his energies were roused to greater energies and higher exertion. He never quailed in the face of any difficulty or trial. Not that he trusted wholly in himself, he trusted in his cause and trusted in God, to whose service he had pledged himself and his entire being. One need only look at the vibrant and dynamic life of the parish of St. Patrick's here on Mott Street. It represents the very triumph of otherness. Seen through the eyes of those coming face to face with a strange new environment, St. Patrick's then and now speaks of the courage of people who have passed through the tenement houses and narrow streets of this culturally diverse and rich neighborhood in their quest to find acceptance, peace, prosperity, and most importantly, liberty. This is the legacy of John J. Hughes, Bishop, Archbishop, defender of the weak and reviled, protector of a nation within a nation, a great Irishman and a greater American, a man who led his people to the table of the American dream. In the same tenacious and fearless spirit of John Hughes, let us today go forth from this historic campus, determined to collectively keep that dream of others wishing to breathe free, alive, and well, until they too have landed on that great platform of freedom.